The wind, a mournful coyote's howl across the sun-scorched earth of the Wyoming Territory, was the first to witness the abomination. It whipped dust devils around Jedediah Mercer's worn leather boots as he reined in his aging sorrel, Betsy. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, narrowed against the relentless glare, not at the horizon, but at the lone, skeletal cottonwood that clawed at the brassy sky. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. A stillness had fallen, the kind that precedes either a rattler's strike or God's own judgment. Then he saw it. A shape, small and dark, suspended from a thick lower branch, swaying with a ghastly rhythm in the wind's cruel embrace. Beside it, a crudely painted sign, nailed askew to the trunk, screamed its poison even from this distance. Jedediah's heart, a thing he thought long dead and buried with his Mary and little Sarah, clenched like a fist. He urged Betsy forward, a cold dread seeping into his bones, colder than any winter's night. As he drew closer, the horror resolved itself into an unbearable clarity. A girl, barely more than a child, her dark hair splayed, her clothes torn. Chinese, by her features. And the sign, its white letters stark against the weathered wood, read, "White men only save their OWN." The words were a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. For a moment, the world tilted, the ghosts of his past swirling with the dust, Mary's gentle smile, Sarah's bright laughter, lost to the fever that respected no man's grief. He'd been a shell since then, a man walking dead. But this obscenity was a spark to dry tinder. His gaze, hard as granite, fixed on the rope, then the frail form. The sign was a dare, a gauntlet thrown down by the devil himself. Jedediah Mercer was a white man. And he was about to prove that sign a damn liar. He swung down from Betsy, his movements economical, a lifetime of ranch work etched into his lean frame. His face, weathered by sun and sorrow, was a mask of grim resolve. He didn't waste breath on curses, the air itself felt defiled enough. His knife, honed sharp enough to shave a whisper, flashed in the sun as he sliced through the thick rope with a single, savage stroke. He caught the girl's slight weight, a fragile burden against his chest, and for a terrifying instant, he thought he was too late. Her skin was cold, her limbs unnervingly limp. He laid her gently on the parched grass, his calloused fingers searching for a pulse at her throat. A flicker. Faint, thready, but there. A desperate, ragged breath escaped his own lips. She was alive. He ripped the sign from the tree, the wood splintering in his grip, and cast it onto the ground as if it were a venomous snake. His eyes scanned the surrounding desolation. Who had done this? What manner of beast walked in human skin to commit such an act? The silence of the plains offered no answers, only the echo of his own rising fury. He looked down at the girl. Her face, even in its pallor, held a delicate beauty, now marred by terror and suffering. Bruises were blooming on her slender neck. What path had led her to this God-forsaken place, to such a fate? He didn't know, and right then, it didn't matter. All that mattered was the flicker of life he held in his hands. He tore a strip from his own worn shirt, soaking it with water from his canteen, and gently wiped the dust and grime from her face. Her eyelids fluttered, a bare movement, but enough. "Hold on, child," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse and emotion. "Just hold on." He lifted her again, cradling her with a tenderness he hadn't known he still possessed, and turned towards Betsy. The sun beat down, merciless, but a different fire burned in Jedediah now, a righteous flame that seared through the apathy that had encased his soul for too long. He had lost his own, yes, but this child, a stranger from a distant land, had reawakened something within him. A duty. A purpose. As he mounted, settling her carefully in front of him, he cast one last look at the desecrated tree, the discarded sign. The wind seemed to whisper a challenge, but Jedediah's answer was already in his actions. He was saving one of his own. His own kind. The human kind. The kind that deserved to live, to breathe, to be free from such hate. And he would move heaven and earth to see her safe, and to bring those responsible to a reckoning. The vast, indifferent landscape stretched before them, but for the first time in years, Jedediah Mercer didn't feel quite so alone. He had a life to save, and a wrong to right. The ride to his small, isolated cabin was a blur of grim determination. Each jolt of the horse, each gust of wind, seemed to threaten the fragile life he carried. He kept one hand splayed across the girl's back, feeling the faint, too shallow rise and fall of her breathing. He remembered another small form, Sarah, her breath growing fainter with each passing hour, and a fresh wave of pain, sharp and familiar, pierced through him. He fought it back. This time, he wouldn't be helpless. His cabin, nestled in a small, sheltered gully, was a stark place, reflecting the man who lived there, functional, unadorned, haunted by absences. He laid the girl on his own narrow cot, the only softness in the room the worn patchwork quilt Mary had made, a splash of faded color in the monochrome of his existence. Her eyes, dark almonds in a pale face, fluttered open as he eased her down. Fear, stark and primal, widened them. She tried to recoil, a small, choked sound escaping her lips. "Easy now, child," Jedediah said, his voice softer than he intended. He kept his movement slow, deliberate. "You're safe here. No one's gonna hurt you." He didn't know if she understood his words, but his tone, the careful way he moved, seemed to register. The terror in her eyes didn't vanish, but it lessened, replaced by a wary watchfulness. He built up the fire in the small stove, the crackle a small comfort against the silence. He brewed a weak broth, the smell of herbs filling the small space. When it was ready, he propped her up gently, supporting her head. Her lips were cracked, her throat surely raw. He offered a spoonful. She hesitated, her gaze darting from the spoon to his face, then back again. "It's just broth," he said. "Help you get your strength back." Slowly, she opened her mouth, and he fed her, a spoonful at a time. The act was intimate, a profound contrast to the violence she had endured. He saw the deep, ugly rope burns on her neck, livid against her skin, and a muscle twitched in his jaw. The image of that sign, its hateful message, burned behind his eyes. Who were they? And why this girl? Such calculated cruelty spoke of a deep-seated malice, a rot that went beyond mere thuggery. As she sipped the broth, a little color returned to her cheeks. She was young, perhaps 14, 15 summers. Resilience was a tough plant, he knew, and it seemed to have taken root in this child, despite everything. Later, as she drifted into an exhausted sleep, he sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle, his mind a turmoil. The cabin was filled with ghosts. He saw Mary, her hands busy with mending, her quiet hum a balm to his soul. He saw Sarah, playing on the rag rug, her giggles echoing in the rafters. The loss was a constant ache, a hollow in his chest that never quite filled. He had thought himself done with caring, done with fighting for anything beyond his own bleak survival. But the sight of that girl, strung up like an animal, had shattered his carefully constructed numbness. It was an affront to everything he'd once believed in, everything Mary had represented: kindness, decency, the simple dignity of a human life. He looked at the sleeping girl. Unmai, she had whispered her name earlier, her voice barely audible, when he'd asked. Unmai. It meant a peaceful beauty. What a cruel irony. He felt a fierce protectiveness rise in him, an echo of the love he'd had for Sarah. He owed it to Mary's memory, to Sarah's, and now to this stranger, Unmai, to see this through. He would find them. He would make them answer. The dawn brought a fragile calm. Unmai was awake, her eyes following his every move. He offered her more broth, and a piece of dried fruit he'd been saving. She ate slowly, her gaze still wary, but no longer terrified. He tried a few simple words, pointing to himself, Jedediah, then to her, Unmai. She nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Progress. He knew he couldn't keep her hidden here forever. She needed proper care, and he needed answers. The nearest settlement, a dusty collection of buildings called Redemption Gulch, was half a day's ride. It was a place he usually avoided, full of rough men and loose morals. But it was the only place to start. He left Unmai with water, food, and his rifle propped near the door, showing her how to use the bolt, though the thought of her needing to use it made his blood run cold. "I'll be back before nightfall," he promised, hoping she understood the intent, if not the words. Riding towards Redemption Gulch, the landscape seemed to reflect his mood, harsh, unforgiving, yet with a stark beauty if you knew where to look. He was riding into the lion's den, but the thought of Amai's face, the shadow of the noose still on her neck, hardened his resolve. Justice was a word that had lost its meaning for him long ago. Now, it was the only word that mattered. What depths of a man's soul are stirred when he witnesses pure, unadulterated evil? Can a heart, long frozen by grief, thaw in the heat of a righteous cause? Perhaps you, listener, have faced a moment where the comfort of inaction warred with the urgent call of conscience. Redemption Gulch was aptly named, Jedediah thought grimly, a place where souls either found a sliver of salvation or were damned entirely. It baked under the midday sun, a single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings that seemed to lean on each other for support. The saloon, the general store, the assayer's office, and a small, clapboard structure optimistically labeled sheriff. He tied Betsy to the rail outside the general store, his eye sweeping the street. Men loitered, their gazes lingering on him, a stranger. He ignored them, his focus singular. Inside the store, a portly man with nervous eyes, Mr. Henderson, looked up from behind the counter. "Help, Y.A.?" Henderson asked, his voice a little too high-pitched. Jedediah kept his tone level. "Looking for information. About a Chinese girl. Found her yesterday, west of here." Nearly dead Henderson's face paled. He licked his lips, his eyes darting towards the window. "Chinese girl? Don't know nothing about that. We don't get many Orientals through here." The lie was as plain as the fear on the man's face. Jedediah leaned slightly on the counter, his presence suddenly filling the small space. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. "Someone strung her up from a tree. Left a sign. Said white men only save their own." Henderson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Terrible. Just terrible. But I didn't see nothing." From the back of the store, a woman's voice, quiet but firm, cut through the tension. "He's lying, Mr. Ta." Woman emerged, Mrs. Henderson, her face etched with worry but also a spark of defiance. "Silas Blackwood and his boys rode through here 2 days ago. Bragging. Said they were cleansing the territory of Silas Blackwood." The name landed like a stone in Jedediah's gut. Blackwood was a cattle baron, a man who believed the entire territory belonged to him, a ruthless tyrant who crushed anyone who got in his way. He owned most of the land, half the businesses, and, some said, the sheriff himself. Henderson shot his wife a terrified look. "Martha? Hold your tongue." But Martha stood her ground, her gaze fixed on Jedediah. "They had a girl with them. Tied to one of their horses. Chinese. They were cruel to her. Said she was a trespasser, that her kind wasn't welcome." Jedediah's hands clenched into fists. "Where would I find Blackwood?" Martha hesitated. "His ranch is north of here, a big spread. But he practically owns this town, mister. Even Sheriff Brody," she trailed off, her meaning clear. Sheriff Brody. Jedediah had heard of him. A man said to have once been decent, now worn down, perhaps compromised. As if summoned, the door to the sheriff's office across the street opened, and a man with a tarnished star pinned to his vest stepped out. Sheriff Brody was older, his face weary, his shoulders slumped as if carrying a great weight. He saw Jedediah, saw the tension emanating from the store, and slowly walked across the street. "Trouble, Henderson?" Brody asked, his voice tired. Jedediah stepped out to meet him. "Sheriff, I found a girl yesterday. Chinese. Someone tried to lynch her." Brody's eyes, dull and listless, flickered with something unreadable. "Heard some talk. Didn't think it was true." "It's true," Jedediah said, his voice hard. "And I heard Silas Blackwood was involved." Brody sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "Blackwood's a powerful man, Mr. Name's Jedediah Mercer, Mr. Mercer. He's got a lot of influence. Sometimes things happen out here. Things a man can't always control." Jedediah's stare was unwavering. "A child was tortured and left for dead," That's not things happening. That's a crime. That's an abomination. Are you the law here, Sheriff, or does Blackwood wear that star too? Brody flinched, a hint of shame, or perhaps old anger, in his eyes. I do my job, Mercer. But Blackwood, he's got a small army. I'm one man, then you're either with the law, or you're standing with them, Jedediah stated, turning to leave. I aim to see justice done for that girl. If you want to help, you know where to find me. If not, stay out of my way. He walked back to Betsy, the eyes of redemption gulch on his back. He knew Blackwood would hear of his inquiries. He was probably expecting it. The confrontation was coming, sooner rather than later. As he rode out, he saw Mrs. Henderson watching from her window, a silent prayer in her eyes. Perhaps not everyone in this town was cowardly. Perhaps a spark of decency still flickered, waiting for a wind to fan it into a flame. The sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon when Jedediah reached his cabin, casting long, eerie shadows across the land. He found Amai huddled by the cold stove, the rifle clutched in her small hands, her eyes wide with a fear that tore at him. She visibly relaxed when she saw him, the rifle clattering to the floor. He knelt before her, gently taking her hands. They were ice cold. He came, she whispered, her English broken but understandable. Man, big man, angrier Blackwood scout. Or perhaps one of his thugs, checking to see if the job was finished. Jedediah's blood ran cold. They knew where she was. They knew he had her. There was no more time for planning, no more time for caution. They would come, and they would come in force. He looked at Amai, at the terror that still clung to her, but also at the flicker of fight in her eyes, the same resilience he'd seen before. We can't stay here, he said, his voice grim. They'll be back. He quickly gathered what little they had, some food, his ammunition, the quilt. He helped Amai onto Betsy, then swung up behind her. Hold tight, child, he urged Betsy into the deepening twilight, not towards Redemption Gulch, but towards the rugged, broken country to the east, a place of canyons and hidden draws, a place where a man could make a stand if he had to. He knew Blackwood's ranch lay to the north, they would expect him to run south, or west. He was counting on that. As they rode, the moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, offered little light. Amai was pressed against his back, her small frame trembling, but she made no sound. He could feel her fear, but also a strange sense of trust that humbled him. He was all she had. And he would not fail her. He thought of Sheriff Brody. Would the man find his conscience? Or would he remain a puppet of Blackwood's tyranny? Jedediah couldn't count on him. This was his fight. His redemption. The wind picked up, whistling through the rocks, carrying the scent of rain and danger. They found a narrow defile, a place where the rocks rose high on either side, offering some cover. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. We wait here, he told Amai, helping her down. He settled her in a sheltered alcove, covering her with the quilt. He took up his position at the mouth of the defile, his rifle resting on a rock, his senses straining in the darkness. Hours passed. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the sigh of the wind. Then, he heard it. The distant drumming of hooves. Too many to count. They were coming. Jedediah checked his rifle, his resolve hardening into cold steel. He was one man against an army, but he was a man with nothing left to lose, and a righteous fury burning in his soul. He thought of Mary, of Sarah. He thought of Amai, her innocent face. He would not let them take her. He would not let hate win. The riders appeared as dark shapes against the faint pre-dawn glow, a dozen, maybe more, led by a large figure on a powerful black horse. Silas Blackwood. Even from a distance, the man radiated arrogance and brutality. They were heading for his cabin, as he predicted. They'd find it empty. Then they would track him. Jedediah waited. Let them come closer. Let them ride into his chosen ground. The first shot was always the most important. It had to count. It had to send a message. As Blackwood and his men drew nearer to the defile, Thinking it just another shadow in the landscape, Jedediah sighted down the barrel of his rifle. His finger tightened on the trigger. This was not just for Umai. This was for every soul crushed under the heel of tyranny, for every voice silenced by fear. This was for the hope of redemption, not just for himself, but for this land. The first crack of Jedediah's rifle split the pre-dawn stillness like a thunderclap, the bullet whining past Silas Blackwood's ear, close enough to make the big man flinch and curse. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, men shouted, their surprise total. "He's in the rocks," one yelled, firing blindly into the darkness. Jedediah was already moving, using the terrain he'd chosen, a ghost in the shadows. He wasn't aiming to kill, not yet. He was aiming to unnerve, to disorient, to show them this wouldn't be an easy fight. Blackwood's voice, a furious roar, cut through the din, spread out. "Flush the coward out. I want him alive, and I want that damn girl." His men, a collection of hardened thugs and sycophants, fanned out, firing sporadically into the defile. Jedediah fired again, his shot taking the hat off one of the riders, sending him tumbling from his horse. He reloaded, his movement swift and sure, honed by countless hours of practice, and perhaps, by the muscle memory of a past he rarely spoke of, a past involving blue uniforms and battles fought for different causes. Umai, huddled in her alcove, watched with wide, terrified eyes. Jedediah had given her his knife. "If they get past me," he'd said, his voice grave, "don't let them take you alive." The words had chilled her, but she clutched the handle, her small hand surprisingly steady. She would not be a victim again. A bullet ricocheted off the rock near Jedediah's head, showering him with stone chips. He grunted, shifting position. They were closer now, trying to encircle the narrow passage. He knew he couldn't hold them off indefinitely. He was buying time, but for what? Suddenly, a new sound joined the fray, more gunfire, but from a different direction, from the rear of Blackwood's men. Jedediah risked a glance. Figures on horseback, silhouetted against the rising sun. At their head, a man with a tarnished star on his chest. Sheriff Brody. And with him, a handful of townsmen, their faces grim, armed with hunting rifles and sharp guns. Mrs. Henderson's defiance had indeed fanned a spark. Brody's voice, no longer tired but filled with a newfound authority, boomed across the clearing. "Blackwood! This is the law. Lay down your arms. You're under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, and a list of other crimes long enough to hang you twice." Blackwood, caught between Jedediah's rifle and the sheriff's posse, let out a howl of rage. "Brody! You damn traitor! They're with me." He spurred his horse towards Brody, drawing his own pistol, but he never got the chance to fire. Jedediah's rifle spoke one last time. The bullet struck Blackwood's gun hand, sending the pistol flying. Blackwood screamed in pain and fury, clutching his shattered wrist. Seeing their leader down and outgunned, the fight went out of Blackwood's men. Some threw down their weapons immediately, others tried to flee, only to be rounded up by Brody's posse. The battle, fierce but brief, was over. Jedediah lowered his rifle, the tension slowly ebbing from his body, leaving him weary but alive. He saw Umai emerge from her hiding place, her face streaked with dust, but her eyes shining with a fierce light. She ran to him, not in fear, but with a look of profound gratitude. Sheriff Brody rode up, his face etched with a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. He dismounted, walking towards Jedediah. "Mercer," he said, extending a hand. "I reckon this town owes you. You reminded us what that star is supposed to mean." Jedediah took the offered hand. "You came, Sheriff. That's what matters." Brody looked towards Blackwood, now disarmed and defeated, his arrogance replaced by a venomous scowl. "He'll face justice. A real justice." This time he then turned his gaze to Umai, his expression softening. "And this young lady, we'll see she's taken care of." Properly, the sun was fully up now, bathing the landscape in a golden light. The air, still carrying the tang of gunpowder, felt cleaner, fresher. The shadow of Blackwood's tyranny had been lifted. As Brody and his men secured the prisoners, Jedediah walked with a mitre where Betsy stood patiently. He lifted her onto the saddle. She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his. "Thank you," she whispered, the words heartfelt. Jedediah, he managed a rare, small smile. "You're strong, and stronger than you know." He wasn't sure what the future held for her, or for himself. Redemption Gulch might find its namesake, or it might slip back into complacency. But something had shifted. A stand had been made. A line had been drawn. The hateful words on that sign, "White men only save their OWN," had been answered not with words, but with courage, with sacrifice, with the undeniable truth of common humanity. As he prepared to lead Betsy away, perhaps to find a doctor for Amai in a town further on, a town less tainted, Mrs. Henderson approached, her face beaming. "Mr. Mercer," she said, pressing a small bundle of food into his hand. "God bless you. You showed us all." Jedediah merely nodded, a lump in his throat. He looked out over the plains, now quiet and peaceful. He had faced his ghosts in that defile, fought for a life that wasn't his own, and in doing so, had perhaps saved a piece of himself. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was no longer shrouded in the same darkness. He had found a reason to care again, a reason to fight. And in the innocent eyes of a rescued child, he had found a fragile, precious hope. And so the High Plains found a fragile peace, a testament to courage that defied the shadows. Jedediah Mercer, the stoic protector, had not just saved a life, he had rekindled the very spirit of what it means to be human in a land that tested every soul. If Jedediah's stand for what's right, his defiance of that hateful creed, stirs your soul, tell us in the comments what courage means to you, and what injustice you would stand against. And be sure to ride on over to our next Tale of the West by clicking on the video, and subscribe so you don't miss a single story from a land that forged legends and tested the very fiber of humanity.